it all starts with healthy soil. And the 4 principles going from top left, maximize continuous living roots. Well, since we're putting in trees in our little forests that are perennials, there are going to be living roots in that soil 100% of the time, which is fantastic. We will not be pulling them out and digging them out, moving them. It's permanent. And of course, we can do that with annual gardens too, but I'm not talking about that this time. Minimizing disturbance. So that's one of the founding principles that we used to heart with our little forest soil preparation, because we haven't done any tilling. We are not disturbing the soil whatsoever where we've located our 4 little forests. And I'll talk about that a little bit more and what we've actually done. Then maximize soil cover. That can be through mulches or living mulches, plants, cover crops. And we have chosen mulches, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then maximizing biodiversity. So we are certainly doing that with the mix of plants that we're putting in our little forests. So the soil is going to support everything from herbaceous annuals, perennials, shrubs, understory trees, and canopy trees, everything in between. And we have loads of biodiversity in our plant mixes. And if you are wondering about what plant mix would make up a little forest, on the Rideau Thousand Islands Master Gardener website, there's a tab for little forests, and Joyce has put up a wealth of information. There's little forest home kits, which show you different species and the species lists, depending on the type of forest you want. Check it out if you haven't seen it. It's fantastic. So next, let's talk about the soil. For each soil location that you're starting a garden, it doesn't matter if it's a little forest garden or any garden, you want to know what kind of soil you are actually dealing with. And in that vein, I'm really just focusing on soil texture. And you do that with a soil sedimentation test. The texture is the sand, silt, and clay fraction of any soil. And most soils are a mix of these 3. Of course, there's organic matter in really nice, healthy soils, but there may be no organic matter. And this test does not measure organic matter. You just want to know what your sand, silt, clay are. And to do that, it's a very simple test, and we'll put instructions to do this. You get a jar, like a mason jar, a 1 liter jar, fill it about 1/3 full with a sample of your soil, and you're taking that at, about the 6-inch mark. You're going to add cold water until the jar is about 3/4 of water full, and then add 5 tablespoons of liquid dishwashing soap. This is important because it'll dissolve the sticky organic substances that actually hold the soil aggregates together. And then you're going to just shake it vigorously for 10 to 15 minutes. And in that shaking, you're separating all the particles so that they can settle purely as sand as the bottom, silt is the middle, and clay is the top layer. And when you're finishing shaking, just finish very quickly and put it on the counter. And depending on your proportions, it can settle within an hour and you can see distinct layers, or it might take a couple of days. And if it's really high clay, it might take a week or 2. So that's a great way to find your soil texture. Now, this is a sample from the Wolf Island Little Forest site. And you can see that my sand fraction is 66%. The silt is 26% and clay is 8%. And I got that by just measuring out the bottom to the top of the clay. So that's your soil sample in the jar. And then measuring the thickness of the layers. And I've got the math to show it. Let's see. There we go. The total depth of soil in the jar was 3.8 centimeters. The sand was 2.5. The middle was 1 and the clay was 0.3. It should all add up to 3.8 total soil. And then you're just going to find the percentage of those layers by doing the math. You're dividing the sand layer with the total layer, 3.8, 2.5 divided by 3.8, and that's going to give you 0.66. Multiply it by 100 to get a percent, and then you've got your 66%. And just to finish it off, you use a soil texture triangle. It's available on the web for free. It's the way you can classify your soil texture. And you follow the arrows on each side of the triangle to what your percentage is. So the clay is 8% on the left side of the triangle. You're going to start at the bottom and you're going to go up 8%. So you're just below 10. And then the silt is on the right-hand side. It's 26%. So you're going to follow 26% down, all the way down to where your clay is. And then your sand layer is 66%. And you're just going to follow it up, and there you've got your sandy loam. Something doesn't add up here. I'm going to have to fix this. Sorry, guys. Errors happen, so you want to make sure your math is right. The lines should meet up exactly at the point, at one point. Otherwise, you didn't do the right math. So I'll double check that. At any rate, to put this in perspective, if you think of, let's think of seeds and the perspective of sand, silt, and clay using seeds as an analogy. Walnuts, take a whole walnut in the shell, that's about the size of a sand particle in comparison to a corn seed, which is about the size of a silt particle. And then the sand is, or the clay is very, very fine. Think of a flax seed. And you've got walnut, corn to flax. That gives you a really strong visual of the different particle sizes. And all of that makes a difference because it's how your soil holds water. It's how your soil holds nutrients. It's how you're going to manage your little forest, how much watering, when, how often. And these management decisions are all going to be informed by the texture test. Now let's go to more visual test. You're just going to use your senses, and all the locations had pasture grasses growing there. So it's a very high bacterial bacterial-dominated soil is what I'm trying to say, versus fungi. There's almost no fungi in a type of pasture grass grown situation, and that's related to the biology of the soil. So we have our mineral fraction, which is not living, and then you've got the living part of the soil, which is the fungi and bacteria. And for little forests, because we're planting mostly deciduous trees, because that's our eco zone, we're a temperate deciduous hardwood forest location, we are wanting more fungal dominated soil. And so we're going to make that happen by the materials we add to feed the soil microbes. There's another test that we did, the water infiltration test. I'm not going to go into that because this is about soil prep, but this showed me very quickly in an hour, a 1 foot dug hole, that water just drained fully in 1 hour. So that confirms my sandy loam soil. And now we're going to prepare the soil site. You want to layer organic materials that fungi favor, and that's what we're going to attract to the site. And we're also going to inoculate the plants when we plant them with a mycorrhizal fungi mix, so that we are introducing the right kind of fungi at the beginning. They associate with plant roots, and our little forest is off to a good start. But in preparation, as early in the spring, ideally it's better in the fall. So if you're thinking of a little forest on your property, let's just start this fall. And you want to collect leaves and just pack the leaves down on the grass about 4 to 6 inches thick. That would be great. If it's oak leaves, you might have to use the lawnmower to chop them up a little bit. Same with poplar leaves. They're very waxy and they don't break down so much, so they'll pack and inhibit water from going down. They won't decompose as quickly as you'd like. So just chopping them up with the lawnmower helps. And in this case, we were starting our Little Forest soil prep in the spring, and we didn't have the leaf mold as much as we'd like. Certainly we didn't at Wolf Island site. So we used old hay, which is a carbon source, and that's what we're looking for, high carbon. And so we spread that 4 to 6 inches thick on the soil surface on top of the grass. So there was nothing to do, no digging. We marked out our location, and then we just laid the hay on top, or the leaves. You can even leave the leaves in the bags if you're getting bagged fall leaves. Then we topped that with about 1 inch of composted manure. And when I say composted manure, a lot of people just say manure. Obviously, you would never use fresh manure for many reasons. It should be composted for a minimum of 6 months first before you use it in any garden. And so that's what we did. We had loads brought in, and it was spread on top of the leaves, about 1 inch thick, and that's your nitrogen component. So already the food that we have provided to the soil organisms is leaves and hay, which is carbon. The leaves are favored by fungi. So we're already starting to push the soil from a bacterial dominated soil to a more fungi. But to finish it off and really make those fungi happy, you top the manure off with 4 to 6 inches of wood chips, preferably fresh wood chips, deciduous wood chips. And this is a term, ramial chipped wood, that's used to identify these prized wood chips. They're from branches no more than 2.5 inches or 7 centimeters thick, and it's fresh deciduous wood, and it's chipped and it's piled on top of the manure, and that is dynamite fungal food. So we're really pushing the soil to become more fungal dominated, and then we're going to plant, inoculating with mycorrhizal fungi, which is what you see here. It's a powder that you buy, granular or fine powder, and you can see there's so many different kinds on the right hand side. Evergreens require something different from deciduous, and some families of deciduous trees associate with various fungi, not all of them. And so to have a mix, this has been shown to be the most beneficial. And then of course we are continuously feeding the trees with their own leaves as they fall every year, and that's fungal food for them. We're never going to take away any of the debris. And this is just a really neat graphic to show how there's such a interaction between the bacteria and fungi in the root zone and the plant roots. This is like the brain of the plant, and they're signaling to the bacteria and fungi in the soil. I've got food for you, and you've got food for me, because fungi bring lots of phosphorus to plants. And it's just a beautiful system that we're still learning about. We just still don't know a lot about it, but the 4 soil health principles are what guides our soil prep. And like I said, the Rideau Thousand Islands Master Gardeners website has terrific resources on little forests, what they are, and soil prep will be there. And I love this quote that Joyce put up: let's make magic, let's re-enchant our cities, let's plant little forests as songs, poems, and love letters to the land, and experience the wonder and delight of a deepening relationship with the land. And don't forget, the little forests mature into mother forests, gifting their seeds to naturally regenerate future forests. So we need lots of forests, and this is how we're starting to ramp things up. And you can do it too. in your neighborhood or on your property. So I'd like to open it up to questions. I know there's a lot here, but we don't have to talk about this. So if you've got other questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if I can't, maybe some of my colleagues will be able to pitch in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Astrid. That was really informative. Does anyone have any questions? I think people are still digesting all of the information.
Well, there's a lot, and I did a little lesson for the school kids, grade 4 to 8 here on the island, and yeah, it's a lot to take in, but little by little it becomes repetitive, and it starts to sink in. So I see that somebody does have a question about using cardboard or newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm starting to see some questions coming in here.
Yeah.
Let me one sec here. Okay, I have some questions. Sharon's asking, can you put fresh manure on in the fall if it stays there for 6 months before planting?
Yes.
Okay, great. And
although who wants to work with it? But I mean, if you have a tractor and you're doing it that way, that's fine. I mean, that's what farmers do.
Right. It might be when you get your friendly neighborhood farmer to do it for you.
Yeah.
And Sandra's asking, what about grass and also discarded plants? Can you use that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm assuming grass clippings. Grass clippings are a nitrogen, so that would be sort of a manure ingredient in your layers. So dried grass is better, which is what we use. Hay is dried grass, basically. So for sure, yeah. So we're kind of composting on the site with these layers, but we are building the layers to favor fungi, and that F:B signifies the ratio of fungi to bacteria, and that's what we want, high fungi. So that's why we have lots more wood chips.
Okay, fantastic. And you said there was a question about cardboard. I didn't see that one, so I wonder if it was directed directly to you. You want to answer that one?
Oh, it does look like a direct message. Can we use cardboard and newspapers? Yes, yes, yes. One of the reasons we didn't, because we're doing large areas, 100 to even 300 square meters, and that's a lot of manhandling of collecting cardboard and laying it down and not letting it blow away. So in small sites, I think it works very well, and you want to make sure it's thick. Newspapers, anywhere from 10 to 20 sheets, and cardboard, and you don't want any waxy or plastic residues from tape and that kind of thing. Take out staples. So there's a lot more work to that, and but in the small site it works very well, no problem. But you'd still want to then put the manure on top.
Okay, and can you explain to the group what inoculate means?
It's a live spore of beneficial fungi that's added to a carrier ingredient so that it's in a powder form or a granular form. And those spores are dormant. And that's how fungi reproduce. They produce spores, and then when the conditions are right, those spores wake up and grow new mycelium and grow into new fungi hypha. And so when we're adding the spores to directly to the plant roots, they have to be touching the plant roots, because the plant roots actually then wake up the spores. And when there's water in the soil, which is why we water in our plants, it all wakes up and they start growing, and they grow together. And really, these fungi are the first line of defense for plants. They can grow all around all the roots, the root hairs, and protect them even from predators trying to look for a place to munch a root. They can't get past the fungi. So, these associations are so important. So the inoculant is just like eating yogurt to inoculate your gut with healthy probiotics. And you could consider this a kind of probiotic for plants.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm just going to jump for a moment to Brendan's question. How does the mycorrhizae get applied to the soil, directly to the or directly to the rootstock?
Well, you have to put it there. You're just going to get some powder and follow the recipe on the package. And the easiest way, and that's what we're going to do, is we'll add it to a great big pail of water, like a 5-gallon pail of water. We'll put the inoculant, the spores in the powder, into the water. And then every time we're ready to plant a tree, we'll take it out of the pot and we'll dip its roots into the water, and the spores will stick to the root ball, and you're going to plant it that way. And those spores eventually will wake up and associate and grow together with the plants. Another way is just taking the powder and applying it directly to the plant roots. If you have a big pot and big roots, you can just take the powder and put a small handful on the root ball itself. And what I do for seedlings, when I'm starting seeds, I'll actually put the powder in the soil mix that I'm going to start my seeds in. So the seeds will germinate and the roots will grow directly and find the spores in that soil mix. And so when I plant those plants out, they will already be there on the roots. So I don't have to do it again.
Okay, great. And Marjorie was asking, she'd like to know about the size and compost of wood chips and horse manure. So Marjorie, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I'm just unmuting. I'm with an organization who are going to do a zero carbon community. And in that community, on about 8.9 acres of land, we're wanting to put a microforest or a little forest. We're looking at the size a little bit bigger than a double tennis court.
Okay.
And for us, the farmer has been using the field, and we think that he's, from what we can tell, and I have to ask him, but it looks like he's put rye. He's used rye. Now, my understanding, when rye is not something you want to plant on right away. That's what I understood. So you have to let it for a little bit, and maybe you can put compost in it and make it beautiful for the spring. Is there any problem with that? Or do you feel that maybe we should, the compost would lie on this large piece for the winter, and then in the spring we're looking at starting the microforest or the little forest?
Great. Well, that's fantastic. Congratulations. It's wonderful to hear that you're going to essentially have 2 little forests growing there, and the bigger the better. The rye isn't going to be a problem, so he's probably planting winter rye, and you're going to, the soil is going to benefit from that organic matter. The soil is always going to benefit from organic matter, so that's a cover crop that's providing organic matter to the soil, but it's also providing more bacterial food than fungal food. So you still want to do the recipe of putting leaves on top of the rye, and then the manure, and then the wood chips. You've got to have the wood chips.
Yeah, we have a neighbor who tells us he has horse manure and wood chips. This is
Okay.
like he's put it. Do you think that's a valuable thing for us to put on?
Sure, it's wonderful. And I say that because, you know, if you don't smother the rye, it can come through and grow and compete, and you don't want that. So yeah, you want to make sure that you have the thickness that you need. So 4 to 6 inches, minimum 4, 6 is better. In the fall, starting, you are going to have a great place to start planting in the spring.
Can I just add, I'm thinking, because you're getting this from a horse, someone that keeps horses, And often what they're doing is they're using wood shavings as the bedding material. And so the manure and the shavings all get mixed together. And that's probably what he's suggesting, right? That he has for you. So Astrid, did you want to comment on that specifically? Because it's
Okay.
different than manure and then wood chips.
Right, absolutely right, for sure. So that would be then considered your manure layer. So when you're composting manure, it still needs carbon. And so that manure has the carbon from the wood shavings mixed into it. So that's your composted manure layer, 1 inch. And then you still need your fresh wood chips on top.
Okay, so on top of that even.
Yes,
Okay, all right, thank you.
you're welcome.
Thanks very much, Marjorie, for that question. Okay, Jasmine's asking, when you do soil test, how and where and how much soil do you take? She has several vegetable beds, and do I take soil from each bed or test just do one test on each bed? And what's the recommendation there?
So is it the soil texture test that you're interested in?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so what you've been working with your garden beds, and maybe you notice that the soil is a little bit different in one area versus another area. So then I would do a soil test in those 2 different areas. But if it seems the same, and if you're not sure, you can do it in different areas. In a bed, let's say 20 feet by 4 feet, I might do it at either end, or one in the middle too. That's 3 tests, and they should be very similar, but often they're not, just depending what the history of the location is. So there's no minimum. It's a great test if you see there's differences, like say your tomatoes are growing really good in one spot, not so good in another spot, then I would choose those 2 spots to do the test and see what you're dealing with.
Okay, and as a follow-up to that, Jasmine says that she uses peat moss, sheep manure, and compost in the vegetable bed. So will she even end up having a lot of soil in the test since there's so much organic matter?
Right, so typically the organic matter is added to the top. You're not tilling it in, but you want to get down to about the 6 to 8 inch mark, which is the root zone where your plants are. That's what you're really testing. And that's a really good point you raise about the organic matter. Like I said, this test doesn't measure organic matter, but there will be organic matter in your soil sample, and it will float on top of the clay layer. So it might look dark, it might look black even. That's humic acid from the organic matter. That's great, but you'll still be able to see your layers, and maybe they won't be as thick. It doesn't matter. You're getting the ratio, the percentages of the layers, and that's what you're looking for. So 6 to 8 inches down, and the top floaty stuff, that's organic matter. Don't bother with that. You're not calculating any of that in this soil texture test.
Okay, great. And another follow-up question. How do I make sure wood chips carry no harmful insects and other diseases?
The only way to know is knowing the source of your wood chips. What is it? Is it invasive buckthorn? Could be buckthorn seeds in it. Where did the wood chips come from? So if you're not certain, I would want to make sure where those wood chips are coming from. So, you know, we have a waste site on Wolf Island where homeowners can bring brush to the site, and then the township chips it all. And so people can take the chips. But I didn't want to use that because I know that all kinds of stuff can end up in that pile. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know what it's made of. So I talked to an arborist instead and told him what I was looking for. And if he had wood chips from hardwood deciduous trees, that's what I was interested in, and that's what I got. So I think you need to dig into the history.
And as a follow-up to that, do we need to be careful about making sure that ash is not included in that? Or is that going to be a problem when it's chipped?
I don't know the answer to that. I really don't.
I can jump in there. I researched that because they asked that question for the Highway 15 site. And it looks like there can be some ash borer eggs that would last very briefly. So I think letting it sit, as long as they're sit, there should be not an issue.
That's great, Joyce. And I think that having that manure layer will help start to decompose those wood chips in a really swift way. And that would take care of the decomposer organisms that are working to push that soil into a fungal dominated soil. They're going to take care of a lot of the pathogens. That's why we let it sit for as long as we do.
Okay, great. And could you just repeat again how long you're wanting to let it sit before you plant?
6 months is ideal.
Great. Okay, and Brendan has a bunch of questions here. So maximize continuous roots. Is it problematic to have maintenance roots or walking paths that wind through a little forest? Does that interrupt the continuity of the forest?
Wow, what a fantastic question. And Joyce knows the answer to this one too.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Brendan, there needs to be 100 square meter continuous forest and a minimum width of 4 meters. So if you have a 200, 300, 400 square meter little forest, you can have paths that wind through as long as any specific section of it has the 100 square meters minimum 4 meter width.
And can existing trees be incorporated into Little Forest?
Take it away, Joyce.
Well, and Brendan's asked me that one before, and I think that's a difficult one. Mostly, like at Lakeside, we have a number of early successional silver maples, and we will be having to cut those down because they are early successional species. And Little Forest, you don't have early successional species because they're just too rapid, fast growing for the Little Forest, which is mid to late succession you're looking for. And then there's trees like Norway maples, which just don't play well with other species. So you would not plant them with Norway maples. Really, the methodology is for an area without trees. You could connect it in, and that's what Astrid is looking to do on Wolf Island. Is there is like a hedgerow like forest right beside the site. So she's going to kind of connect into that. But if there are trees, like their roots already have really infiltrated the site. And so that chance of partnership when they're young and they're competing for the competition to reach the sky that causes them to go so fast, the shading of those existing trees will affect. And so you won't get the same type of growth as you would with a site with no trees.
Okay, great. And do you have commercial sources for leaf mold or grass clippings, composted manure and RCW wood chip, which is ramial?
Ramial
chip wood? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so the commercial sites, and of course we rely on them for really big projects. The cities do this all the time, but Tomlinson and Kingston has leaf and yard waste compost. So you could actually start your first layer by putting compost down on top of the grass, and then maybe some more leaves, and then your manure, and then your wood chips. And of course, those arborists are the site, the professionals that are the ones making wood chips. So you want to contact them, and they very often sell ramial chipped wood, Well, I shouldn't say very often. It depends.
Right. And Tomlinson, I believe it's $40 a yard, and they can deliver up to 5 yards
They have
in
wood
a
chips?
load. Sorry, no, the compost.
The compost. Yeah.
The composted grass clippings and our yard waste.
Yard waste, right. Yeah.
Okay. And another good sort, like and did you say you can use straw as well?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I opted for old hay because it's no good to the farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And straw is expensive.
Yeah.
So we wanted to just get freebies as much as possible. And the beautiful thing about the big round hay bales, those old hay bales, boy, once you get them started, you can roll them out and it's like laying a carpet. No, it's so easy
Absolutely.
peasy. Love it.
Yeah. And I found the same with straw. It's harder to find old straw.
Sure is.
And but it's a lot less, it's not nearly as heavy.
Right.
So you could actually have a bale of straw put in the back of your truck. And so yeah, you just basically roll it out like a carpet. It's fantastic. Okay, next question. Okay, so less so a soil question. What are the best means to protect new plantings from pests? Thinking specifically gypsy moth caterpillar and deer. And if you have any comments on coyote urine for using for deer.
How much time do you have?
Well, how much time do you have, Astrid?
Astrid, I also put in the chat, so maybe give a brief answer, but for everybody, Astrid will be giving a talk specifically on protection. And I think that's October, we've got that scheduled for. Yep. So tune into that as well.
Okay, fantastic.
As far as gypsy moth goes, I think with all predators in the garden, the more biodiversity that you have in the soil and above the soil, you're setting up for a give and take between the good and the bad, the balancing act that happens in nature. And sometimes things are out of balance, like we've seen this year with gypsy moth, but it will correct itself again. So I'm of the mind to not worry about that one so much. But deer is another world unto its own, and I think there are so many good books on the topic and so many good references on the web. And I have been trying just about every single method you can think of and have my own thoughts. But one thing I have learned is that deer can be trained. So just because it worked one year for you, putting up fishing line, let's say a fishing line fence, doesn't mean it's going to work for you the next year, because they learn and they learn and set that up for their young ones to learn. So, but I'll be talking about that in more detail in October.
Okay, and as regards to the coyote urine, I did do some research on that, and personally, I wouldn't recommend it. The coyotes are farmed to obtain the urine, and it's not necessarily the best practices. So coyotes work well.
Yeah. Thanks, Tracy.
Okay. Let's see. And what tools do you use to prepare the site? Is it all manual? Do you have a skid steer, for example, to spread over large areas?
Great question. You can't go wrong with a bobcat. I think every gardener wants to own one, at least I do. But failing that, you can rent them, and there's people who have them. But mostly manual work. But obviously the delivery of the materials, if you can minimize the labor required to spread and have your deliveries spread evenly on your site, then manual labor is not difficult to handle that. But if it's all piled in one great big pile and you have to spread it over 100 meters, that's a lot of work. So really talk to your delivery guys about spreading out the load and that helps. And not a heavy loader, because you don't want to compact if you are using a loader or a backhoe or a bobcat. If you are using the loader bucket to spread, make sure it's a light one with big fat tires so that you're not compacting your planting site.
Okay, great. We have a few more questions here. Okay, someone said leaving the chip pile the wood chips, leaving a pile for a while so that it really heats up is a good idea. Thoughts on that?
Sure is. You're already getting the decomposers in there, the fungi are moving in. So that's what I ended up doing. I managed to get an old pile that was hot, working away, and I used a little bit in my wood chip layer as an inoculant. So it introduced beneficial fungi right off the bat. Didn't have to wait for them to find the fresh wood chips. So
Okay.
sure, that's excellent.
Great. And Joyce, can you just briefly explain what you mean by succession when you talk about early or late succession?
So in ecology, they talk about, let's say there's a major disturbance, like you cut down a forest, and there had once been forest. Then when you leave it alone, species start moving in, and the first species to move in are considered early successional species. So they help prepare the soil for later species, which then over time seed themselves in. And so the grasses, weeds, what we consider weeds are often those early successional because they help improve and make the soil ready. And so that's tree-wise, things like poplars, willows, the Manitoba maple, those are all early successional. Late successional, those become what they consider the climax forest, which at one point they said, oh, the forests are all stable once they reach climax. But now, we know this isn't true. There's always disturbance happening and always forests change.
Great. Well, it sounds, with all these fantastic questions, it sounds like we need another session on little forests. So let's see. Kelsey's saying, I have a site, admittedly have not done soil testing, but we're planning to prepare the forest floor in the coming month for planting next year. I tried to turn over the soil and broke my shovel. You said the site doesn't need to have the prepared material mixed into the existing soil, but should I expect to make the added layers extra thick to accommodate for what lies or doesn't lie beneath?
Okay, that's an awesome question. And what I said was that the 4 sites that we've chosen for the Kingston Little Forests project, we know the history is pasture land. It's been fallow. Nothing else has been going on there except mowing. So in light of that, we chose not to do any extra tilling. But if you have a difficult site, an abused site, it sounds like you've got lots of compaction, and there's often the number one reason for that is no organic matter in the soil, and it just compacts. So if you're dealing with a difficult soil like that to begin with, then the little forest, the tiny forest method is to do deep ripping. Take a tool, it's called a deep ripper on a backhoe. It's like a big hook about 1 meter long, and you're just ripping through the soil. You're not turning it up, you're not tilling, but you're cracking it open, and you're doing that every 8 to 12 inches in a crisscross fashion. So you're just opening up the soil, and then when you add compost, you're adding organic matter and it's going into the cracks, and you can start to get water infiltration, and then you build your layers on top, and it's just going to do the work of loosening up that soil beneath you, beneath your prep site. So that's an ideal way to do it. And in fact, that's very often how the Ministry of Transportation plants trees on highway sides. You can imagine it's really poor soil from building highways, but we want our trees and we want good trees. So that's what they do to prep and plant those trees. They use a ripper.
I'm going to throw in a question there to build on Kelsey's, Astrid. Do you know who in town has a ripper? Does the Utilities Kingston or somebody, so if Kelsey needed one for the site?
I don't know. It's a good question to ask them. You know, it's a tool that can be fitted on the loader, and it's probably something you can rent too.
Sandra is commenting here, Robinson Farm. So Sandra, did you have more information on that? Maybe?
Audio, not video. Just because I live near farmers' fields, I've seen over the years the tractors at work, and Joyce, it's the person who actually owns all the land that we like to walk on.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, you could ask them that question, Sandra. I don't know if you have contact information, but I'm not sure it's a ripper that they would have, because a ripper is a very specific use. And since they do more conventional farming, I suspect it's not a ripper.
Yeah, it's probably some tilling mechanism. And that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid turning the soil from the deep layers to the top. We want to maintain the soil profile the way it is. And unless it's really awful stuff, you know, like a subdivision, new subdivision who's gone in and there's been nothing but construction forever. Then tilling makes perfect sense, because you're trying to amend that soil with so much, and you're trying to make it more homogeneous, and you only till once in that situation, and you know that your soil is dead, so you're going to make sure that you're bringing the life to the soil after a tilling event.
Okay, great. And Brendan has another follow-up. Letting the amendment profile sit for 6 months. Does it need to be 6 months of growing season? If I were to plant next spring, could I begin prep in September and let it overwinter?
That's ideal. It's always better to start your soil prep work in the fall and let the critters do the work underneath the snow layer. The fungi and bacteria, in particular the bacteria, are doing a tremendous amount of work in the soil during the winter. And by the time everything wakes up in the spring, the nutrients are there and it can just go to town. So you're actually ahead of the game by starting in the fall. And don't let the winter discourage you. There's life in the soil all during the winter time, and they're busy. And then it's ready in the spring. Ideally, best time.
Okay, and what stage is it advisable to vegetate the herbaceous layer? It sounds like if it's done too early, the herbaceous plants may outcompete the little forest. So Joyce, did you have a comment on that? Or Astrid?
I'll jump in on that
Joyce.
one. In that, with how we're doing it, it's 3 years before we're going to be doing the vegetative layer, just to suppress all there would have been a lot of weed seeds and undesirable seeds on the site. So that gives a chance for, it just builds up that organic matter and gives the seedlings the best chance. And we want to keep them mulched so that they have, to minimize stress and to keep the water in the soil. There are cases, and I know some places around the world, they plant the herbaceous layer right away. And we don't know yet, but maybe having little forest kits for homeowners for the spring. And if we did, that potentially, because it's just a smaller piece, we might do all the layers, including herbaceous layer. But one thing to keep in mind is that the herbaceous layer, if you were to plant sooner and keep it watered, so that, which you would have to do much more of, and you're still disrupting, Astrid might comment on the fungal versus nature of the soil, but the species mix will be different 3, 4, 5 years from now than they would be right at the beginning. At the beginning, there's still a lot more sun. And so some of those forest species, the soil isn't ready for them yet. And so you'd have to do more meadowy mix and then still have to replace that as those died off over time with seeds or plants that were more forest. Astrid,
Joyce,
did you have more to?
yeah, that's great, Joyce. I was going to say to add also that I kind of like the idea of once we've planted the tree seedlings, then to observe what's happening. We're going to keep it weed free, plant free from that herbaceous layer for the reasons you just stated for the first few years, but then what's coming in, and we can be selective and then add seeds for more desirable plants, but it will change, like you said. So I'm kind of interested to see how it will evolve on its own.
Great.
Yeah, that's a great answer there, Astrid, because even observing lakeside and some of the species that have been coming in there on their own, and there's some fabulous little surprises that have come in. And so it would be interesting to see with the forest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And one more question here. Best way to manage the undesirable herbaceous layer in the first few years? An answer to that. And do you use a line trimmer around growing saplings?
No, never, ever, 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 ever. No, they're just too delicate. One slip, you'll sneeze and you'll just miss. I'm sorry, we're planting so densely that you do have to do hand weeding. There's no way around it. I could envision that maybe a lot of weed seeds have sprouted. Maybe not, but if it happens, what if your tree seedlings are really hard to tell in between all those other plants? So I think it's dangerous to use a line trimmer.
Great. Well, that seems to be the end of our questions, and it is now 5 to 2. So if anyone has any last minute questions, get them in there now. And thank you so much, Astrid, for that really fantastic presentation and all those answers. And Joyce, thank you so much for all of your advice and helpful knowledge. Yeah, so again, thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and join us again next week, Thursday at 1 o'clock.